buddy? No, your eyes are not deceiving. I'm back after a long and dreadful hiatus. College was once again a fucking bitch, and this time around, I finally finished college. One of my proudest achievements, but I'm back from hell, and it's time to review another game. And today, we're gonna review the third installment of the Gran Turismo franchise. Gran Turismo 3 A spec for the PlayStation 2, released on April 28, 2001 in Japan, and it was released overseas 3 months later in July 2001. The game was once again developed by Polyphony Digital, and believe it or not, GT3 was actually my second GT game that I've played, with GT4 being the first game of the franchise that I've played. And while the game didn't have much content compared to Gran Turismo 4, I still had a very good time with it back when I was a young boy. In fact, it was so good that I actually owned the two versions of the game, the European version and the American version, which the latter I played it most when I was a kid. But today I want to find out if Polyphony Digital did succeed with the generation jump from the PS1 to the PS2. So let's find out. After the success of Gran Turismo 2 in Japan, Polyphony Digital knew they need to make another game in the franchise. Since the PlayStation 2's announcement was just around the corner, they decided to actually make their next game on that console. Then, on September 20, 1999, their next game was going to be revealed alongside the unveiling of the PlayStation 2. However, it wasn't called Gran Turismo 3, but rather Gran Turismo 2000. When it was revealed, it became clear that graphics-wise it had some improvements, even though it was just Gran Turismo 2 but only with better physics and graphics. Then, in 2000, during the PlayStation Festival of that year, a demo disc was released to the public, and this demo is pretty famous or infamous in the Gran Turismo community, because this game has only one track and only one car, the track being Seattle Circuit and the car being the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 5. However, you might be wondering, how can a game, let alone a demo build, be so infamous or famous? Well, that's because a username on YouTube named BK4 decided to turn the theme song of Gran Turismo 2000 into an ear rape with a yellow Lancer Evo 5 as an image. This was pretty much the birth of Gran Turismo memes. He and many people, including myself, had used this little theme song as well as the yellow Lancer as punching bags for meme creation. Not to mention that the yellow Lancer meme has spawned other GT memes, like the GT40 meme, Midget meme, the Mission 34 from Gran Turismo 4, and many others. In retrospect, I really had tons of fun making those memes. Those were the good times. But back to Gran Turismo 2000. In this demo, you can drive around the Seattle circuit for about 120 seconds. But that's to be expected, since this demo was basically just a showcase of what the PS2 could do. And the graphics of this demo compared to the final product look pretty dated. Granted, this was an early demo of Gran Turismo 3, but still, it looks kinda crappy. Gran Turismo 2000 was originally going to be released on December 2000, but unfortunately it was delayed to April 2001, and its name was changed to Gran Turismo 3 A spec that we know today. Granted, the delay was pretty much unavoidable, given Polyphony Digital is notorious to delay their games, with GT5 being the prime example of that. And boy, the delay was worth it, because what we got from the final version compared to what we got from the GT 2000 demo builds was different and most importantly better. As a result, upon release, the game received critical acclaim, selling over 15 million of copies worldwide. But the question was the game any good? Well, that brings us to the next chapter of my review. Gran Turismo's 3 gameplay structure didn't change that much compared to Gran Turismo 1 and 2. You buy cars, tune them to the maximum potential, and race against the opponents. However, there were some changes in regards to both arcade mode and simulation mode. So let's start with the arcade mode. Arcade mode has a lot of changes in comparison to Gran Turismo 2's arcade mode. For example, the arcade mode has been divided into 6 stages, and each stage contains 5 to 6 tracks to race. Winning all the races in one stage unlocks another batch of tracks to race. However, to unlock more cars in the arcade mode, you need to win the stages on the higher difficulties. Speaking of difficulty, the arcade mode has 3 levels of difficulty: easy, normal, or hard. Completing the arcade mode on easy only unlocks the ending movie, whereas playing on normal and hard will unlock new vehicles to use in new tracks. Fun fact, but did you know GT3 has a hidden difficulty mode, Professional mode, which makes you race on a track in 10 laps with the AI being brutal as heck. So long story short, good luck facing these opponents on this nightmarish difficulty, LeMayo. Anyways, you can also use your cars from the simulation mode in the arcade mode, which is pretty awesome. The arcade mode's cars roster is divided into 5 groups. Group C has the low tier cars like the Audis, PT Cruiser, and the MRS. Group B has the mid tier vehicles like the Silvia, Salca GT4, VX220, and the FTO. Group A has the fastest road cars available like the Skyline, Impreza, Corvette, and the Tuscan Speed 6. Then we have Group S, where many race cars like the Japanese touring cars, American and European race cars appear during the races. And last but not least, we have the Group R, which has the rally cars like the Impreza rally car and the Ford Focus rally car, among many others. As far as difficulty goes in the arcade mode, it's not that hard. Even if you play on hard, as long as you have 4,000 years of driving skills, you're good to go. That doesn't stop there though. The mode also has a new feature, the Time Attack mode, which is basically like the time trials from Crash Bandicoot 3. In this mode, you have to drive around 10 events and setting the fastest lap possible. Getting gold on all the 10 events will grant you the Pena Sperante race car. You might be wondering, is it hard? Oh yes, it's hard. It's a Gran Turismo game, so the license tests as well as the time trials are hard. Since you're not dealing with the average racers, oh no, you're dealing with the employees from Polyphony Digital. Yes, those lap records were set by the employees from the development team, with the gold time set by the man himself, Kazunori Yamanouchi. To break those records, you better make sure that your 4,000 years of driving skills are on point, because one mistake can lead to your doom. I myself spent hours and hours to get gold on all of the time trials, and it was a torture to get them all. Then we have iLink mode, which is a multiplayer mode that you can play across a network of many PS2 consoles, which they are connected by Sony's iLink cables. As far as how many games did support the iLink mode, there were only a few, like Gran Turismo 3, Unreal Tournament, and Time Splitters 2. Unfortunately, this feature was pretty much discarded, since online gaming was going to be revolutionized, and many PS2 games in the future were going to utilize the online feature that the PS2 had. Not to mention that the iLink port from the fat PS2 models were removed when the slim models were going to be produced. Now, since we talk about the arcade mode, let's dive into the simulation mode, which in true Gran Turismo fashion, it's the meat and potatoes of any game of the franchise. Gran Turismo 3 simulation mode is pretty identical to Gran Turismo 2 simulation mode, however with a few changes and twists here and there. First off, when you start a new game, you start with 18,000 of credits. However, this time around, the game doesn't feature a used car dealership. But I'll get to that later, which kinda limits your choices when it comes to choosing your starter car. But fear not, the starter cars in GT3 are decent in its own right. With 18,000 of credits, you can either buy a Miata, a Sprinter Turismo, a Volkswagen Beetle, PT Cruiser, or the Vitz RS. Granted, while some cars such as the Daihatsu Sirion and the Mazda Demio GLX aren't bad per se, you will struggle with these cars, as these two are pretty weak against most of the events in the beginner league. For me, I prefer starting the game with a Miata, as it has an amazing power spike when you install a stage 1 turbo. I mean, going from 126 HP to 245 HP with just one freaking stage 1 turbo is overkill, which trivializes most of the events like the Club and Cup, FR Challenge, 80s Sports Cup, as well as the Roadster event. However, if you want to be more creative, you could actually install some racing slick tires for the Roadster endurance after winning some events and selling some prize cars, of course. The event itself isn't that hard. Sure, you can have your car tuned to the max, however the AI in this event is pretty forgiving, not to mention that using hard racing tires will give you an advantage over your opponents, since you don't need to head over the pits as much as your rivals. The Turismo is also not too shabby as a starter car. It's much cheaper than the Miata, which makes it much easier to buy a Stage 1 Turbo. I mean, after 2 races in the Sunday Cup, buy the Stage 1 Turbo and you will sweep the other events in no time. Unfortunately, the Turismo gets power creep later in the game, since by the time you complete the 80s Cup, you will get rewarded with a Savannah RX-7, which is a decent car in its own right and totally outclasses the Turismo by a wide margin. The Yaris RS is also not a bad car to start with, and I dare to say it's better than the Turismo because of one specific reason: the Yaris the championship. If you have enough money to upgrade your Yaris, then this championship is a breeze. The championship is composed by 5 races, and each race rewards you with 5,000 credits plus a 10,000 credits if you win the championship, and also another Yaris which you can sell for like 3,000 credits. The best part of this is that this can be an excellent early grinding technique, since if you have a powerful Yaris, completing the championship in addition to selling the prize car can net you up to 38,000 credits, which is freaking insane. Do that at least twice and you can buy a Skyline GTR with ease. As far as rankings goes, I would put the Miata in the first place, Yaris in second place, and the Turismo in third place. But keep in mind that this is just my personal opinion. Let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite starter car in GT3? Similar to other Gran Turismo games, if you win all the races in an event, you will earn your prize car. However, unlike in Gran Turismo 2, where you can win an infinite amount of prize cars, in this scenario, you only get the prize car only once. For example, if I win the Sunday Cup and get rewarded with a prize car, I will only win that car one time only. Luckily, however, the championship events are more forgiving, since you can win these prize cars again and again, if you keep racing these events. However, there's a twist. If you win a championship, there will be 4 prize cars, but these will be selected randomly, so it's more of a question of luck whether which car you will get. One improvement that Gran Turismo 3 has is that the rally events are much better than ever. Sure, it's still not as immersive as Colin McRae Rally 2.0 rally events, but nevertheless, compared to Gran Turismo 2's rally events, GT3's rally events are, put it bluntly, more functional and enjoyable. In Gran Turismo 2, the rally events were basically setting the fastest lap in that rally track. In Gran Turismo 3, however, you will face your opponent 3 times with multiple laps per race. Speaking of events, the events are divided by leagues: Beginner League, Amateur League, Professional League, Endurance League, and Rally League. The Beginner League has events that last around 2 to 3 laps per race, Amateur League has events that last around 5 to 7 laps per race, and this time around the tire wear has been implemented in most of the events in the league. Then we have the Professional League, where the hardest events reside in that league. Each event lasts around 10 to 15 laps per race. However, some events like Polyphony Digital Cup, as well as the Formula GT Champions, some of the races last more than 10 laps. In my personal opinion, the events in the Professional League last way longer than they should. I mean, 10 to 15 laps per race in an event is kinda overkill. I wish it would last like 7 laps per race, that would be fine, especially in the Formula GT Championship. Some races that event last like 7 to 8 laps. Jesus Christ, Polyphony Digital, isn't that a bit excessive? Like in every Gran Turismo game, in order to race a lot of these events, you need to complete the license test. Which, if you know me by now, I clearly despise the license tests from any Gran Turismo game with a passion. Sure, when you play this game for the first time, they're fine. But if you play this game over and over and over and over, trying to do the license tests are a pain in the ass, at least for me. We do have the previous tests like cornering, accelerating, or braking tests, as well as the special license tests. You know, the usual stuff from Gran Turismo. The GT Auto makes an appearance for the first time in the Gran Turismo franchise. There you can buy modified rims, wash your car, and my favorite part is changing the oil of the car. This is pretty important as changing the oil of the car can increase the horsepower of your car a bit. Not by much, mind you, but enough to get an edge over the opponents. Another reason why changing the oil is important is because if you drive your car many times, there will be a red icon on your HUD that will indicate that you need to change the oil of your car. Not doing so will cause major power and speed penalties to your car. This feature adds a lot of realism when it comes to taking care of your cars, so that's pretty cool. The upgrade options in Gran Turismo 3 are pretty much the same as in the previous games, so there's not that much to talk about, except that there's no racing modification for your cars, so that's a bit of a bummer, but I'll talk about it later. In Gran Turismo 3, there are only 187 cars available in the game. For comparison, Gran Turismo 2 has around 620 cars to choose from. Now, at first this might seem a major step down, however, the reason that GT3 cars roster has been cut down to 187 is because we're moving to the PS2 era, and reworking the car models was a gargantuan task to do, especially there was like 620 cars in GT2, and reworking all the cars from that game to GT3 would take forever, so they decided to cut down the roster to make it up with better car models and everything. So what cars did make a return in GT3? Well, you still have the obligatory Skylines, RX-7s, Lancers, Civics, Imprezas, and Supras, as well as the return of the Corvettes and the Viper. However, there are new kits on the block, like the Pagani Zonda, Peugeot Esperante, Ford Falcon, the new versions of the Impreza and the Lancer Evo 7, Acura RSX, the concept version of the RX-8, the Opel Speedster, and the newer versions of the Camaro and the Corvette. However, there are also hidden cars, like the Diablo JGTC car, which was exclusive to the Japanese version of Gran Turismo 3, and the Porsche 911 GT3, which is an unused car because, you know, EA exists. Fun fact, the 911 GT3 was actually Kazunori's personal car in real life, which explains why it's a hidden car, so that's pretty heartening. Other hidden cars like the Lancia Stratos in its rally form can't be obtained in normal ways. They can only be accessed via cheat codes. It doesn't end there though. For the first time ever, Gran Turismo 3 features F1 cars, and they are pretty much the fastest cars in the game, and they are required to complete the Formula GT Championship. While the car roster is pretty short, I still like it though. There are a lot of bangers like the Pagani Zonda, the Viper, the Ford GT40, and many others I can think of. Also, it was an early PS2 title, so there were some corners that need to be cut off, so there's that I guess. As for the track roster, Gran Turismo 3 has over 19 courses. Most of the tracks from GT2 do make a return, like Apricot Hill, Midfield Raceway, Trial Mountain, Test Course, Special Stays Route 5, and many others. There are also new tracks such as the iconic Tokyo Route 246, the Complex String, which is used exclusively for time trials and some licensed tests here and there, and last but not least, we have another real-life circuit beside Laguna Seca, Monte Carlo, which is very fun to drive around. The newer courses look pretty good and well designed, you know, typical Polyphony Digital stuff. In my opinion, I have mixed feelings about the track roster of Gran Turismo 3. On one hand, I appreciate the return of older courses like Trial Mountain, Apricot Hill, and Midfield Raceway. I mean, they got a massive graphical upgrade, which is pretty cool, but on the other hand, I feel kinda disappointed that there are only 3 new tracks, not to mention that other iconic tracks like High Speed Ring, Autumn Ring, and even Red Rock Valley don't make a return, which really sucks. Even so, I still enjoy driving around the courses from the game, so there's that I guess. Not to mention that I love the graphical update that the other courses got, so that's a plus as well. The physics and the controls have been greatly improved in Gran Turismo 3. The physics at the time when the game was released were much more realistic than in previous games. In Gran Turismo 2 and 1, the physics nowadays were pretty arcadey. Granted, they were realistic for the time when they were released, but compared to the physics of Gran Turismo 3, they look pretty dated. And sure, while its successor Gran Turismo 4 outclassed it with its improved physics, Gran Turismo 3 was no slouch in terms of controls and physics. The controls were redefined and more precise, and also we can have the ability to turn off the driving assist for a more realistic experience. Driving with assists are fine if you're a newcomer, but it does limit your driving skills. I personally turn off the assists for a more challenging experience, and you should drive without assists too. Trust me, it's a marvelous experience. And also, you can tune up your vehicles, like increasing their top speed and acceleration, their suspension parts, etc. This can be very useful, especially in events such as like the wind, where increasing your top speed is very crucial to your success. Like in the previous games, every car feels different, as some cars understeer like the ones who have an FF drivetrain, others oversteer like the FR and MR cars. So, long story short, you need to learn all the techniques that you need in order to become the GT master. And while Gran Turismo 3 doesn't support neck-con, given that the controller isn't compatible with the PlayStation 2, GT3 does support steering wheels, especially the GT Force, which was released in 2001. The steering wheel was also bundled with the game, which is pretty cool. Sadly, I don't have the wheel, so I can't really say how it works and how good it is, so there's that. When it was released in 2001, Gran Turismo 3 blew us away with its amazing graphics. It was like nothing we played before. Cars became real-life cars. It was like the best thing ever. Now, that statement might be a little bit of exaggeration, but when I was a kid, I thought it was like the best thing ever. One of the biggest additions in the graphical department was that the game ran at 60 frames per second rather than 30 in the previous games. This was a huge deal. Seeing a racing game running at 60 FPS was a dream come true for many kids at the time. Now, you might be saying, well, that's good and all, but we can play the previous games at 60 frames per second with patches and emulators. Well, my lovely people, during the time of 2001, we didn't have emulators like DuckStation and 60 FPS patches, so what we saw was what we got. Now, compared to the graphics from the previous games, the jump from one generation to another was extremely significant. It was mind-blowing to see what the PS2 was capable of, and Polyphony Digital sure nailed it to the freaking core. For instance, if you compare to the PS1 version of Special Stage Route 5 to the PS2's Special Stage Route 5, you will find that there's drastic changes to the graphics. Now, Gran Turismo 3 runs at a resolution of 480, which by today's standards is pretty low. However, the game runs in an interlaced resolution instead of 480p, which results a lot of interlacing artifacts when playing on HD TVs or even emulators like the PCX2. On CRTs, you wouldn't notice any flaws since they were designed to handle interlaced content. However, the PCX2 community has decided to create some no interlacing codes for games that only run at 480i, like Tekken Tag Tournament, Jak and Daxter, and even Burnout 1. This is pretty useful, since you will no longer have interlacing issues when playing on HD TVs or PCX2. That said, there's a catch. If played on their native resolution, the game looks very pixelated, as if the game looks like a PS1 game. Fear not though, because thanks to the upscaling feature from the PCX2, you can play this game at higher resolutions. However, keep that in mind as some tracks, most notably in the night tracks, are pretty GPU intensive to run at higher resolutions. However, as I said before in my Hot Pursuit 2 review of it, this is the PS2 that we're talking about, and you're bound to find some games that are CPU intensive like the Ratchet & Clank games, and games that are GPU intensive like the Burnout games. Gran Turismo 3, as well as its sequel, Gran Turismo 4 for that matter, falls into the latter category. You don't need a very strong CPU to run these games, but you definitely need a beefy GPU to run these games at 4K. Personally, while I do love playing these games at a higher resolution, I actually like to play them at their original resolution, to preserve that original PS2 feeling. Keep that in mind that sometimes upscaling these PS2 games can cause some graphical artifacts that you usually wouldn't see when playing at their original resolution. The original soundtrack of Gran Turismo 3 is, put bluntly, incredible, composed by three talented composers, Isamu Horira, Daiki Kashu, and Masahiro Ando. The soundtrack packs a lot of excitement, adrenaline, jazz, and rock to my ears. Here, listen. just like in the previous titles, Gran Turismo 3 also has licensed soundtrack, and once again, the licensed songs were different per region. For instance, in the US version, we had lots of great bangers, like Supernova Goes Bog from Power Man 5000, Are You Gonna Go My Way from Lenny Kravitz, Call It Briscoe from Elite Force, and Kickstart My Heart from Motley Crue. The PAL version was no slouch either. They also got some bangers like Just the Day from Feeders, Super Moves from Overseer, and Shark from Ash. In my opinion, I like both the American and European soundtracks, and they pack a lot of excitement and energy to the game. As for the intro music, once again the Japanese version uses Moon Over the Castle, whereas the American version uses Are You Gonna Go My Way, and the PAL version uses Just a Day from Feeders. The car engine sounds are also much better than in previous games. Although the engine sounds from the race cars in the game sound pretty goofy, they sound like a vacuum cleaner. Don't believe me? Check this out. I mean, these sound effects are so hilarious. Too bad that these engine sounds are not there in the future Gran Turismo games. I miss that engine sound. It's so iconic in the Gran Turismo franchise. God, I love this game. In 2002, Polyphony Digital released a spin-off of Gran Turismo named Gran Turismo Concept, released for the Japanese and European market. Although an American release was planned, it was unfortunately cancelled for an unknown reason. Gran Turismo Concept, in a nutshell, is basically a diet version of Gran Turismo 3. There's no simulation mode, although there's still the licensed tests, as well as the arcade mode. The car roster has been even more stripped down than in Gran Turismo 3. However, there's a reason why. The game focuses entirely on concept cars like the Nissan GT-R, Ford GT, Cadillac Scion, the new Lotus Elise, and many others. Gameplay-wise is basically the same thing with Gran Turismo 3, so there isn't much else to talk about. There are only 6 tracks in the game, with Autumn Ring making a return, and honestly it looks much better than in Gran Turismo 4. Not to say that Gran Turismo 4's Autumn Ring is bad, it's just that in Gran Turismo 4, the colors from the track feel a little bit bleak in my eyes. In Gran Turismo Concept though, it looks much better in my opinion, but that's just me. Overall, Gran Turismo Concept is a nice spin-off. It's basically, like I said, a diet version of Gran Turismo 3 with concept cars, and it's pretty much a game that it's easy to pick up and play. It's a short game, but what did you expect? It's a small spin-off title, showcasing some concept cars that were interesting to drive at the time. At the end of the day, Gran Turismo 3 is a racing game that totally defines the early 2000s, and for a very good reason. It was the sequel that people wanted. People wanted the next game having better gameplay, better graphics, and so on. So the question is, did Polyphony Digital deliver on their promise? The answer would be totally yes. Polyphony Digital totally delivered on what they promised for the players. An amazing game. Gran Turismo 3 had a lot of amazing traits, like better graphics, which was mind-blowing at the time when this game was released, the gameplay being more realistic than ever, and it had a lot of improvements. Now sure, there are a few tiny issues, like the length of the professional league races, which they last way longer than they should, the car roster being somewhat limited, but then again, that was something to be expected, given that this was a PS2 early title, and Polyphony Digital had to cut some corners somewhere. Even so, this game is an amazing experience, and I recommend it to everyone who wants to start with the franchise, and I feel like Gran Turismo 3 is honestly the best way to start. 4 years later, after the game was released, we had Gran Turismo 4, and improved everything that Gran Turismo 3 did, and in my opinion, I consider that game the best PS2 game ever made. However, I still hold Gran Turismo 3 in high regard, not just because it was an amazing game in its own right, but had not Gran Turismo 3 been successful, Gran Turismo 4 as well as the other GT games in the future wouldn't be made. On top of that, it also showcased what a generation leap really was, graphics, and gameplay wise, as it showcased what the PS2 is capable of. And Polyphony Digital somehow nailed it to the core. Overall, Gran Turismo 3 is a classic, and it's one of the most important PS2 games ever. And if you haven't played it, I definitely recommend it. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching everyone. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and hit the subscribe button for more new content. And I'll see you guys next time.